Big Boy Reacts, and today we're going to be watching I Made a Snake That Hurts People.
Spend using your MBE Visa credit. Debit card. And be one of our lucky winners to travel and attend
Vaza.
Total Energies Cap Athon
Vaza, okay.
2023. Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things. There I was just casually browsing the internet when I saw this guy. Just your everyday run-of-the-mill snake with his pet bug. Except spoiler, that's not actually a bug. It's his tail, and he uses it to make friends with local burbs. And like any totally sane person, I thought to myself, I should make a snake that hunts people. Of course, first things first, we need a snake. Now, my knowledge of serpentine anatomy is limited, but I'm pretty sure all snakes have a single long bone that runs the length of the body, which you're going to make in shape out of a single strand of armature wire. Now, to help the clay in the next step stick, I'm also going to wrap it in its own thinner strand of wire. Now, admittedly, it probably would have been easier to wrap it in thin wire first, but I didn't plan that far ahead. However, poor planning aside, I've got myself a perfect little snake skeleton ready for clay. I'll roll this clay into an extra long, extra snaky wormy dealy, which then gets stuck onto the skeleton bone. I'm also going to try my damnedest to make sure that I'm not trapping any air between the layers of the clay and the wire, since trapped air leads to escaping air, which in turn makes my snake look a little less scary and a little more gassy. Otherwise, once I've got the body built up, I can start adding the scales underneath by rolling various blades across the body to mark out each of the scales before coming back through with some sculpting tools and silicone shapers to refine the shape. Same with all snakes, his neck is going to start as a thick-tipped shovel that gets stuck onto the neck nub and blended together with the body. Then I can cut a line down the middle to separate the jaws, bulk out the neck nub connection joint, and hollow out the mouth.
Okay.
I'll poke a couple shallow eye sockets using a ball stylus, then jam some oversized ball bearings in place for his eyeballs. His eyebrows get added and blended in, before finally giving him some breathing holes by way of stabbing the tip of his head. Now, in order to make his scales, I want to clearly delineate his bottom half and his top half, so I'll run some extra long, extra thin wormy dealies the length of his body, blending.
Say in the comments what this snake is supposed to be named.
You know I love a good texture, but you probably also know that I'm kind of lazy, so finding the quickest, easiest way to add texture is key.
Wood.
So to save some time adding each individual scale, I spent a significantly longer time trying to figure out how to do it using a roller. Eventually, though, through a series of trial and error, I ended up with this little guy, which I think is probably one of the greatest things I've ever made. Seriously, making accurate, uniform, interlocking scales can be an absolute nightmare, and this little fella at the shockingly low price of totally free is worth every penny. Now, with roller in hand, all that's left to do is make my naked boy into a scaly boy. Finally, with the body details done, I'll add a few larger strategic surface scales around his jaws before moving on to his hand. Now, that clever little fella at the start of the video uses his tail as a lure to catch unexpected prey, and while that's admittedly pretty dope, I wanted to go even creepier. So instead of using his tail, our little manhunter is going to have a hand that's also his tongue. To that end, I've stuck a little ball of clay to the end of a teeny tiny length of wire, flattened it, cut it to size, rolled out some fingers, attached a thumb, and then added some padding, knuckles, and details. Finally, a little isopropyl alcohol will smooth the entire surface, and I can attach it to my snake's mouth. I'll give the tongue a bit of a curve so it's not quite so rigid and straight, then it's just a case of covering up any of the exposed wire, giving the tongue a bit more of a tongue-like shape, then getting to work on building out the mouth so it's as snake accurate as I can get it. Otherwise, once that mouth is finished, that's kind of it for our handsy snake, which means it's prime time. With a primer in place, I can start painting the scales, starting with a bone white followed by darker highlights with khakis and light browns. I'm using pretty watered down paint so that I can easily wet blend it. That way as it dries, I'm left with a nice gradient of light to dark brown. they start to become pretty translucent, which lets the blacking between the scales show through. I'm saying all this as if I had a plan or I knew what I wanted to achieve with this paint job, but in reality, I just started throwing paint at it, hoping something would stick. If all else fails, I can reprime it, delete the footage, and then pretend like my next attempt was the real one. However, through an indescribable series of upward fails, I ended up with a pretty sweet-looking paint job.
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
Now, the mouth and tongue got painted
Okay,
with red
we
washes,
know.
followed by terracotta wash, and then the hand got a light pinkish fleshy hue, which I could then wet blend into that darker color of the tongue to keep it from looking like I just stuck a disembodied hand onto the tip of the snake's tongue. Then I painted the eyes a lighter green and gave them simple black slits. Now, I hummed and hawed and worried about ruining the paint job before I finally decided to just add some black bands along the body. Then I carried that upwards along the face, making sure it was mirrored on both sides. Otherwise, with the paint job done, it's time to make a watery hole. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's some pretty bubbly looking resin there, Adam. You got any plans for that? In fact, I do. After the last few catastrophes, I puckered up and bought myself a pressure pot, and let me tell you, it makes mighty short work of these bubbles. So a simple 72 hours of curing later, and I'm left with this. Which isn't really what I was going for. I'm not really sure what happened. I tested for water tightness before I put it in the pressure pot, and there were no leaks, so I was feeling pretty good about things. However, being a little impatient, I thought I'd crack open the pot and see just how well it had pressurized the bubbles. Upon opening the pot, though, I had a brief moment of frustration and said to myself, well, gosh, this isn't what I was hoping for. Darn, I guess it must have leaked. I'm not wholly sure where it went wrong, but when I opened it up, it seemed to have seeped out of the frame and was starting to cure inside my pot. Now, I had a moment to decide, and I chose to sacrifice the snake and save the pressure pot. That being said, look at how clear that resin is, despite all those bubbles. So, all in all, I'd say it was a success. Fortunately, though, I happen to have another snake. And this snake is far and away a better snake. He's got way more body curled around in a much more interesting way. His head is a better shape, and the paint job is way more cohesive. Oh yeah, and I also took the time to make some little bones to put scattered around him, because I thought that was a good idea. Now, I figured if I'm going to be building a spooky hunting hole in a water dirt pit, then I should at least fill the bottom of the pit with some dirt. So I mixed
They
up a
don't
little
need to
resin
do.
made of
He's
earthy
not
potpourri of
funny.
dirt, detritus, leaves, and rocks. Then I mixed it all
Look,
together and
let's
poured
see.
it into the bottom of my new hole. What is, I think, one of the more artistic shots on YouTube. Now, to keep my snake from sinking to the bottom of the pit, I've given him some little stilts so he's just sitting in the top layer. Now, I did start adding the bones immediately, then I realized as I watched my skull sink that I probably should have waited till the resin set up a little bit more. So I gave it about 12 hours to get a nice thicky syrupy consistency, then added the rest of the bones around the snake. I let my dirty, bony mix cure for another 24 hours to make sure there weren't any egregious bubbles sneaking out during the big resin pour, and then I mixed up another batch of resin and tried again. And again, I was met with tragedy. Nah, I'm just kidding. It worked an absolute treat. If anything, it was almost too clear, but you won't hear me complain about that. Well, I mean, I just did, but you won't hear it again. Anyways, it's time for me to make a dirty hole, which means I need a block of foam. With my block professionally sized for my resin pillar, I'll mark out where I want the hole to be, then score it with my knife and carefully pop the center out. Then score it with my knife and carefully pop the center out. I'll round the hole out, then start hacking at it with a pair of pliers before adding some nice rocky texture with my favorite rock texture device, a rock. Once I've got a nice rocky hole, I'll give the entire thing a nice dark brown base coat. highlights by working my way through a series of progressively lighter rounds before moving on to my favorite part, the static grass. I really like the idea of the snake building its hidey hole in like some guy's backyard, so I decided to go with a nice short grass that you might expect to see in a well-kept suburban garden. To attach to the base, I'm going to use a bead of clear silicone. This will work both as a glue and a sealant, so when I press the grassy dirt hole thing onto the top, it'll create a nice airtight seal, so that when I add my next layer of dirty, swampy resin, it doesn't leak out the sides. I wanted the main body of the resin to be nice and clear so you can see the snake, but I wanted the top layer to be sort of swampy so the snake is hidden underneath. To help with that, I've added a bunch of twigs and roots and bits of plant matter, then sprinkled leaves over the top. And once the initial resin had cured, I added some little ripples moving outwards from the hand. Finally, to spruce it all up and make it look a little more natural, I added some little pebbles to the grass, then sprinkled a little foam flocking around the edges, followed by a dusting of little leaves. A quick spritz with isopropyl alcohol followed by some thinned out Mod Podge will hold it all in place. Then that's it finished and we're on to the glamour shots. As always, a huge thank you to my supporters over on Patreon to keep this channel running, even when I skip a week. And of course, a massive shout out to my newest patrons, A Deity's Rage, H,
Okay, I don't know why I haven't talked for a while.
Star, Stefan, Philip DeMeyer, Kayla Brakowski, Levi.
Okay, goodbye guys, and I hope you have a great day. And bye bye. Make sure to like, subscribe, and bye bye.